Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Kof Ayin Gimel. The Mishnah taught that if there are two people with the same name in one town, let's say they're called Yosef ben Shimon, then they are not allowed to extract money from one another with a promissory note. Because if Yosef ben Shimon A comes in with a promissory note, says here that you owe me $1,000, then the other guy, Yosef ben Shimon B, could say, no, it just says Yosef ben Shimon owes Yosef ben Shimon. Actually, I'm the lender and you owe me $1,000. And so they cannot extract money from each other in that way. However, either of them can come into Beit Din if they have a promissory note against somebody else with a totally different name. It says in the document that Reuven owes Yosef ben Shimon $1,000. So he can come in and make Reuven pay. And Reuven cannot say, oh, it's not you, Yosef ben Shimon, I owe the other Yosef ben Shimon. No, because Yosef ben Shimon is the one holding the document, we do assume that he is the one that borrowed, that lent out the money. And we do not worry that maybe Yosef ben Shimon A dropped it and Yosef ben Shimon B is just happened to pick it up. That's not likely. It does happen that someone drops something and someone picks it up, a random person can pick it up. That we do have to worry about. But it's very unlikely that Yosef ben Shimon A dropped it and it just so happened that the next person that came along and picked it up was Yosef ben Shimon B. Therefore, according to the Mishnah, two people with the same name, if one of them has a promissory note against someone else, they can collect it. Good, that's what we saw yesterday. Now we ask a question from a Braita that we also saw yesterday. According to this Braita, it's more stringent. And it says, just like two Yosef ben Shimons cannot produce a promissory note against each other and make one another pay, so too they cannot get a promissory note and make someone else pay. So what is the essence of their machloket? Why not? The Braita would agree that it's not likely that one just happened to lose it and the other Yosef ben Shimon happened to find it. That's not the reason, because that's not likely to happen. So how come the Braita says that they cannot collect in that way? And the answer is be'otiot niknot b'msira kami palgeh tana didan sabar otiot niknot b'msira v'tana bara sabar en otiot niknot b'msira. The one possibility, we're going to see another answer soon, is that they're arguing about whether letters, the contents of a document, can be acquired by transferring the document itself. Our Mishnah thinks that yes, they can. The contents, the right to collect $1,000 in this case, can be transferred just by transferring the letters themselves, the physical letters, the physical piece of parchment. If Yosef ben Shimon decides he wants to give it to the other Yosef ben Shimon, right? They happen to know each other, and he says, "Listen, I'm transferring you money for whatever reason, and instead of giving you some coins, I'll give you this outstanding loan document, and instead of me collecting it, you can collect it." Our Mishnah says that as just give the piece of paper over, and then the Yosef ben Shimon B can in fact collect it. And therefore, so we're not worried that one is going to lose it and the other one find it. But rather, what's the only way that the Yosef ben Shimon can have it, wrong meaning not the one that originally lent the money, is if one gives it to another. And if one gives it to another, that's totally valid. And so even if the borrower says, hey, I borrowed money from Yosef ben Shimon A, so they can come and say, oh, I gave the piece of paper to Yosef ben Shimon B. And so therefore, go pay Yosef ben Shimon B. Whoever has it, that we assume is the one who legitimately is collecting the money. That's our Mishnah. However, the author of the Baraita thinks that a document, the contents of a document, cannot be transferred just by giving over the letters. Rather, if you want to transfer a promissory note, you have to actually write another document that says, I am transferring the right to collect that's mentioned in this promissory note. I'm transferring that to someone else. And therefore, according to the Baraita, if Yosef ben Shimon A was the original lender, and he just gives the document to Yosef ben Shimon B, thinking that transfers the loan, well, he would be wrong, and therefore the borrower would not have to pay and say, no, it wasn't you, it was the other one, and it was not transferred properly. That's why the Baraita says that if there's two people with the same name, and the borrower comes and claims, no, it wasn't you, it was the other one, then the borrower has a good point, and he does not have to pay until the Yosef and Shimon's bring further proof that whichever one is holding it is really the right one and really deserves to get paid. Or another way to explain the difference between the Mishnah and the Baraita. Everybody agrees that you can in fact transfer the loan just by transferring the document itself. And here they're arguing about whether one has to bring a proof that in fact it was transferred. Our Mishnah says one does not have to bring a proof. If the second Yosef ben Shimon, who's currently holding the document, claim says, oh, the other one gave it to me, he doesn't have to bring proof that it was given to him. And just by giving the document, it's fine. And so therefore, we make the borrower pay. Whereas the Tana of the other Baraita thinks that it's okay to transfer a document just by giving it over to one to another. The loan will transfer. However, there is a responsibility on the recipient to prove that, in fact, the first guy gave it to him. And so because he has to prove it, unless he proves it, the borrower does not have to pay. So that's why he doesn't have to pay until the recipient of that loan document, in this case Yosef ben Shimon B, would prove that in fact he got it legitimately from Yosef ben Shimon A. The itemad. Now, how do we know that this is even under discussion, whether you have to prove it or not? The itemad otiyot niknot b'mesira. Abaye amar sarich lehabi re'aya, but Rava amar eno sarich lehabi re'aya. Because this is machloket between Abaye and Rava. This is interesting because usually we don't want a machloket Tanaim to parallel a machloket Amoraim, and here we're saying that the Mishnah and the Baraita are arguing along the same lines as machloket that we know from Abaye and Rava. But in any case, we're proving from here that this is an issue of controversy. And Abaye says that the recipient does have to prove that he really got the rights to collect a loan from the first person. And Rava says, no, you do not have to prove that. Amar Abaye, mina amina la, tetanya, echad min ha'achin sheshetar חוב יוסף מתחת ידו, עליו להביא ראיה. My love, hu adin la'acharine. Abaye says, what's my source to say that one has to bring a proof? It's from the following Baraita that says, let's say there's two brothers, their father died and they inherited an estate. Along with the estate, not only do they inherit some property and some cash, but they also inherit a promissory note. Now, one of the brothers, or let's say the older one, takes that promissory note and goes to that borrower and says, hey, I want you to pay me. So he's claiming that he alone deserves to get paid, that they made some kind of deal, and the younger brother gave the older brother the right to collect it. Well, if he does that, he has to bring a proof, right? And so wouldn't that be the same in any other case? This Baraita just happened to be talking about such a case because it's a likely case where there would be two people that shared a promissory note because it was part of the estate, and now one person is claiming, no, it's all mine. He has to bring a proof that, in fact, the other brothers agreed that he can collect this alone, and then whatever, they got something else. So yes, he does have to prove it, and just like you have to prove it here, so too, the Yosef and Shimon cases, he would have to prove that he in fact did receive this loan document, and if he doesn't prove it, he cannot collect it, and therefore that explains the reasoning of the Baraita. Rava says, I agree that with that Baraita, obviously he has to agree with the Baraita. However, that Baraita is only talking about the case of brothers, because it's likely that when they get an inheritance, it happens that brothers, they go and they seize things that belong to the other brother from the estate. They try to take it, and so we are worried when there's two brothers that one of them is going to go and take the promissory note and try to collect it all by himself and not share it with the other brother. This unfortunately happens, and therefore therefore, if a brother comes from an estate and comes to collect it, the borrower doesn't have to pay until that brother proves that the other brother agreed that he can collect it alone. But that's a special case where we need proof because there is reason to worry that he just took it from the other without permission. However, if you're talking about just two random people, not brothers, two Yosef and Shimon's, then you do not have to prove that. There's no reason to think that just because two people have the same name, that one's going to go and steal something from the other or seize it. Brothers might rationalize for whatever reason, but regular people won't. And therefore, Rava says that even though brothers, yes, they need to bring a proof, but Yosef ben Shimon does not. And therefore, that is the reasoning of the Mishnah that says, if one Yosef ben Shimon says, hey, you owe me money to someone else, then you have to pay him, and he does not have to bring proof that he received it from the other guy. Even if he did receive it from the other guy, he is believed to say that the other guy gave it to him. Ika de Amre, another version of Abaye and Rava, is just basically the same thing. It's just how they deal with the Baraita. Amar Rava mina amina la. First we have Rava. Instead, the order is changed. Instead of Abaye, bring a proof, and then Rava saying, no, I think that's different. Rava says it first. I have a proof from the same Baraita, the Tanya. Echad min achin sheshetar chov yoseh mitachat yado alav lehavi re'aya. Achin hu deshamtum hadadeh aval acharine la. Rava says, I have a proof from this Baraita because it says two brothers, then one of them comes and produces a promissory note that had belonged to the father. Then he has to bring a proof that the other brother gave him sole permission to collect. So Rava says, it only says that brothers have to do that because it's likely that one brother will seize the document from the other without permission. But if it's not talking about brothers, then they don't have to bring a proof, and that's my proof that one does not have to bring a proof if he received a loan document from somebody else. Mizdahar zehire vela seriche lehavi re'aya kamashmalan. So Abaye, how's he going to deal with that? He would say that in fact it's across the board. Anyone who produces a loan document that he received from someone else has to bring proof that the other person actually gave it to them and consented to give away the loan, and that the other person can collect it. So why does this Baraita mention brothers specifically? Oh, it mentions brothers specifically because I might have thought that brothers would be different, that because generally we worry that brothers will seize from one another, then we would assume that we would be careful, and the brothers would be careful to put it in with a third party or in a safe place so that nobody can take it will seize it from the other. And therefore I might have thought actually that when it comes to brothers, because it's specifically usually a problem, therefore we don't have to check because they would have already checked and made sure that one doesn't take it from the other. If one brother comes and to take it alone, then we can assume that the other brothers gave permission because otherwise they'd be on top of it. So I might have thought that brothers actually don't have to bring proof, and that's why this Baraita says specifically even brothers have to bring a proof, but all the more so other people that might have just taken something from someone else without permission, and they wouldn't be suspecting because there was no reason to be suspect. In all cases, one has to bring proof. Now we bring a new Baraita that we haven't seen before with another opinion altogether. And this Baraita says that just like Yosef ben Shimon, either one of them can produce a document against someone else and collect money, so too they can even produce a document against each other. So this Baraita disagrees with the Mishnah and says one Yosef ben Shimon can bring a document that says, here, you owe me $1,000, and since he's holding the document, we assume that he in fact is the lender, and the other Yosef ben Shimon is the borrower, and that one who's being sued cannot come and claim the opposite because he's not holding the document. So what's at the essence of their machloket? The answer is bechotvin shetar laloveh v'afal pi she'en malveh imo kami palgeh. The question is, is a scribe allowed to write a promissory note for the borrower, even if the lender is not there? If the Our Mishnah thinks that yes, you can. In fact, earlier in the Mishnah, in the Perek, we saw that, in fact, our Perek of Mishnah does think that you can do that. Right? What's the scenario? So it says, yes, we write a document for a borrower, even if the lender is not there. Why? Because sometimes the borrower will go to the scribe with witnesses, and he will ask the scribe, can you please write me a document because I want to borrow money from Yosef ben Shimon, my friend. So we do write that for him, and the assumption is that then he will in fact go to his friend Yosef ben Shimon and says, here, look, I have a document already written up, right? Can you please lend me $100, and then I will give you this loan document. That's the way it should work if everybody's being honest. And so that's why we do allow this to be written to the borrower, and if then the loan doesn't work out, then we assume that the borrower who has the document will just tear it up because then he never got the money. That's if everything is going well. However, we have to worry that maybe this borrower who's named Yosef, if he's also named Yosef ben Shimon, will do a trick. And after he receives this loan document from the scribe himself, he presents himself as the borrower and gets it, which he's allowed to do without the lender there. He will go, and now that it's written and signed, he will take it to court and say to the other guy, look, it says here that you owe me $100, which is totally not true. That transaction never happened. And so, because the author of our Mishnah thinks that one can write, a scribe can write a document for a borrower without the lender there, if they're both named Yosef and Shimon, then he will present himself as a borrower, and then he'll produce it in court and try to extract money. That's why our Mishnah says that two people named Yosef and Shimon are not allowed to extract from one another. However, Tana bara sabar and kotvin shetad alove ad sheyeh malveh imo. The author of the other Batra thinks that a scribe is not permitted to write a loan document to a borrower unless the lender is also there. So if they're both there and they both say, yes, we want you to write it, okay, then there's no problem, because then the scribe will write it and make sure to give it to the lender, or he'll give it to the borrower to give to the lender, and everybody knows about it and is aware, and then it will only happen if they both agree, which means if the loan actually happened. And therefore, since the borrower and the lender have to be there, if one of these Yosef ben Shimons comes into court holding it, then we can assume that he is in fact the real lender. And so that's why he can, according to this Baraita, extract money from the other Yosef ben Shimon. The next part of the Mishnah taught, נמסר לאחד בין שטרותיו, שטרו של יוסף בן שמעון פרוע, שטרות שניהן פרועין וכו'. The Mishnah taught that if someone finds a receipt and it says that Yosef ben Shimon is all paid up, we're assuming that Yosef ben Shimon is the borrower. So then if someone comes and tries to collect money from Yosef ben Shimon A, he says, look, it says here, you owe Yosef ben Shimon, that's you owe me money. The Yosef ben Shimon could say, no, look, I have a receipt that I paid up, and this receipt is about me. And then, if he goes to the other Yosef ben Shimon and says, you owe me money, then maybe he lent to both of them. Then that Yosef ben Shimon can say, no, the receipt that was found is actually referring to me, and I paid. And therefore, since the lender cannot prove who the receipt belongs to, so neither of them needs to pay. We ask about this section of the Mishnah. Tamad nimsa, halon nimsa, maseh mapik. So you're telling me that the only reason why both of these Yosef ben Shimons do not have to pay is because they found a receipt, and it could be either of them could claim that it's their receipt. But what if no receipt was found? Then the person who has the promissory note that says Yosef ben Shimon owes me money, then he could collect. But that's not true. The Mishnah taught that another person cannot take money from either Yosef ben Shimon with a loan document, because when it comes to Yosef ben Shimon A, he says, look, it says here, Yosef ben Shimon owes me $1,000. He says, no, that wasn't me, that was the other guy. And the other guy also says it was the other guy. So the lender will not be able to collect in any case, even without finding the receipt. So what difference does it make if you found the receipt? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Mishulashin. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, it's talking about a case where in the promissory note, it actually has 3 generations. It actually says, Yosef ben Shimon ben Reuven. And the other one says, or Yosef ben Shimon ben Levi. So it says exactly who it is. So we actually do know for sure that it's this Yosef ben Shimon that owes money. So if there was no receipt, then that Yosef ben Shimon ben Reuven would in fact have to pay. But because there is a receipt, so now he doesn't have to pay. We ask, so why don't we look at the receipt and see what name does it say in the receipt? Maybe in the receipt it says Yosef ben Shimon ben Reuven, and then we'll know that this one paid and not the other one. Rav Hoshaya explains that there are 3 generations written in the loan document. So that's how we know who is the one that owes money. For sure, he would be able to collect. But the receipt only has 2 generations. So the receipt, either one can claim that the receipt is mine, and therefore neither of them will have to pay. Abaye Amar, Hachika Amar, Nimsa lalove ben shetarotav, shetaro shel Yosef ben Shimon alai parua, shetarot shenehen peruin. Abaye says, no, you misunderstood the Mishnah. It wasn't talking about a case where Yosef ben Shimon was the borrower, but rather the lender. And this document, the receipt, was found in the documents of the borrower. The borrower is looking through his documents, and it says a receipt that the loan document that he had outstanding to Yosef ben Shimon has been paid. Basically, it says, I have paid Yosef ben Shimon in full. And let's say both Yosef ben Shimons lent money to this individual, and both come to claim, hey, you owe me money. The other one also says, you owe me money. And he owes both of them money. He did borrow money from both of them. But when one of them comes, Yosef ben Shimon A says, look, I have a document that says you owe me money. He says, I have a receipt. Why does he still have the document? Okay, well, at the time that he collected, he said he lost the document, so he wrote a receipt. He doesn't have a document, and therefore I don't have to pay you. And then Yosef ben Shimon B comes and says, hey, look, I have a loan document that says you owe me $1,000. So he can produce the same receipt and said, this receipt, when it says Yosef ben Shimon, is actually referring to you. And I paid you already, and therefore he doesn't have to pay either one. Okay, Rashbam asks a question. What if both Yosef ben Shimons come into the court together and they make a deal with each other? We'll represent each other, and one of them certainly should get paid, right? And the Ritva would say, well, yes, in that case, if they both come together, then this borrower has to put money on the table, and then the 2 Yosef ben Shimons will figure out how to split it. However, Rashbam actually disagrees and says, even if both come in together and say, listen, we're joining our claims together, and you have to definitely pay one of us because you only have one receipt. Rashbam says that the borrower can claim, I wrote one receipt for both of you. Since you both have the same name, so why should I bother paying the scribe twice? It's just a duplicate copy of the same thing. So in fact, it could be that someone would write one receipt that says Yosef ben Shimon paid me, I paid him back $1,000, even though he actually had 2 different loans from 2 Yosef ben Shimon's. One receipt for 2 things would be sufficient. Kesad ya'asu yeshalishu. Now the Mishnah gave some advice. If there are 2 Yosef ben Shimon's in a town and they want to do business normally, so what should they do? Because we have all kinds of restrictions that they're not going to be able to collect from each other and so on. Tana ima yushanem kohanim yichtabu dorot. So the Mishnah already said they should write, the tall one, the short one, the one who's a kohen. Now what if they were both kohanim? Well, in that case, you can always go back yet another generation. Instead of 3, go 4 generations, go 5 generations. At some point, you're going to find some ancestor that they don't have whose names they don't have in common. So find some way of identifying them. Next Mishnah teaches, Haomer libno shetar ben shetarotai parua ve'eni yodeya ezehu. Shetarot kulan peruin. Someone who is going to die tells his son, listen, I have a lot of loan documents here, people owe me. Let's say he has 100 of them. 100 people owe him $1,000 each. So he has $100,000 that is coming in. Now he's going to die. He says, listen, on his deathbed, he wants to be honest. And he tells tells his son, there is one of these loan documents among all 100 that are here has been paid. However, I don't know which one it is. So he is owed, in fact, $99,000 from 99 valid documents, but one of them, the guy paid, and he, at that time, couldn't find the document. It's somewhere in there, and never ripped up that document. So one of them you can't collect. So now he dies. What is the son going to do? He cannot collect with any of them, because if you pick any one of them, maybe that's the one that was already collected, and then he would not be allowed to go and collect with that document. But he doesn't know which one. You don't say batel, because for each person that you're going to, he could claim, oh, your father, I paid your father, right? Didn't your father tell me that one of them was paid? That's mine. He goes to the next guy. Oh no, that's mine. And so he cannot collect any of them. However, there is a way you could collect something if there are two loan documents out for the same person. He lent the same person $1,000 one day, and he lent him $2,000 a different day. And then on his deathbed, he said, listen, one of the documents among all my 100 has been paid. Well, then the son can go to that guy who owes two things, because the father only said that one document was paid, but not two, and therefore he can say, listen, which one was paid? So the other guy will say, oh, the bigger one was paid, the $2,000. Fine, even if you believe him, but certainly the $1,000, the smaller amount, is outstanding, right? Because the father said only one of the documents is paid, not two, so he could collect the lower amount from someone who has two. And if there's more, then if they had 10, then he just cancels out the biggest number, because that's the one we can assume was paid, that he can't prove otherwise. And the rest of the 9, he could collect. אמר רבא, שטר לך בידי פרוע, הגדול פרוע והקטן אינו פרוע. חוב לך בידי פרוע, שטרות כולן פרועין. Rava is now going to elaborate on the Mishnah and make a subtle distinction between the language of shtar versus chov. Like the Mishnah says, if a lender would go to a borrower and he has two documents, loan documents, one for 1,000, one for 2,000. And if he says, the note of yours that I have in my possession is paid. So that means he's admitting that one of the two notes has been paid, but he doesn't know which one. So then the borrower can claim it's the larger amount. That's the one that was paid. So the 2,000 we assume is paid, but he still has to pay the 1,000. However, if the lender says the debt of yours that I have in my possession is paid, well, in that case, we have to assume that the entire debt is paid. The difference is that the word shtar in singular refers to one bank note, one promissory note. That's it, only one of the two. But debt can refer to the total debt. And so he says the debt of yours that I have has been paid, so that can refer to the entire amount. And therefore, since he said that, the borrower can say, oh, right, that's referring to all of the documents, and therefore he doesn't have to pay anything. It refers to the entire debt. That's Rava's position. Amar le Ravina le Rava, ele me'ata sadi mechura lecha, sade gedola mechura lo. Sade sheyesh li mechura lecha, kol sedotav mechurin lo. Ravina asks Rava, what about, can you apply your principle to different language, a language of field? If you say my field or field, sadeh, just plain, can refer to a lot of fields. It's an ambiguous term, kind of like the word chov. So let's say someone comes and admits, my field is sold to you, and he has two fields, a big one and a small one, and we don't know what he meant. Let's say he said that, and then he's not here anymore. And so which one can the buyer collect? And the answer is the bigger one, because he could claim it's the bigger one. Or if he has a document that says, Sadi mechura lecha, my field is sold to you, and so the buyer comes and claims it's the bigger field, well then, yeah, it's one of the fields, it's one of the two. So yes, we assume it's the bigger field. However, according to you, Rava, this is what Ravina is asking. Let's say in the document it just said sadeh, field that I have is sold to you, and just the plain word field can refer to all the fields. So that, are you going to tell me that buyer can now collect all of the fields because the word sadeh can have that meaning, just like the word chov can refer to the total debt? And Rava answers, no. Hatam yad bal hashetar ala tachtona. In the case of the sale, the one that's holding the document, that's the buyer. He has the document that says, Sadeh sheyesh li mechora lecha. It's the seller's words, but the buyer is holding it. He is at a disadvantage because he is hamotzi mechavero. So since he's the buyer is trying to extract land, so then he has to accept the minimal meaning of sadeh, which is only one field. So he gets only one field. Whereas in the case of the promissory note, the one holding the document also is at a disadvantage. In this case, it's the lender because he's trying to extract money from the borrower. And so he has to take the words. In this case, it's the words that he himself said, which is that debt is paid, debt has been paid. So those words, since he's trying to extract money, well, he's at a disadvantage. And in this case, the disadvantage is to take the maximal meaning that the entire debt is paid, because the borrower can say, you said chov, and so therefore chov means the total debt is paid. And therefore, we don't take always the minimal meaning or always the maximal meaning, but rather we apply the rule of hamotzi mechavero alav ha're'aya. And depending on who is extracting the money, so if it's the buyer who's trying to extract property, well then we give the minimal amount. But if it's the lender who's trying to collect payment, then we give the maximal meaning, because the maximal meaning means that the borrower doesn't have to pay anything. We now come to the next Mishnah, and in fact the last topic that we are going to discuss in this longest Masechet of Baba Batra. Mishnah teaches, Hamavet chavero al yedei arev lo yipara min he'arev. If someone lends money to someone else with an assurance from a guarantor, okay, you're the borrower, you're going to pay me back, but you also have a guarantor just in case he pays back. So when the lender wants to come and collect, he cannot collect from the guarantor directly. He has to first go to the borrower, and then if the borrower died or is not around or something, only then can he go to the guarantor. He can't go to the guarantor first. However, if the lender at the time of the loan said, I will lend you this $1,000 on condition that I can collect from anybody who I want, well then, that's a good condition. So then he can go to the guarantor first. Maybe the guarantor has more money, easier person to deal with. He's closer. So he goes to the guarantor first, and then the guarantor will have to pay, and then the guarantor will have to settle with the borrower. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, Im yesh nechasim ladoveh ben kach ben kach lo yipara min ha'arev. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees and says, if the borrower has property, then even if they made a condition and said, and the lender said, I can collect from anybody that I want, even though they made that condition, nevertheless he has to go to the borrower first, because the borrower has property. And only if not, then he can go to the guarantor. Rashbag also said another law. He'arev לאישה בכתובתה, והיה בעלה מגרשה, ידירנה הנאה שמא יעשו כנוניה על נכסים של זה, ויחזיר את אשתו. If someone is a guarantor to pay the ketubah of a woman. A woman's getting married, and the husband says, I'm going to pay you $26,000 if we get divorced. And she says, maybe you're not going to have the money. I want a guarantor. This is okay here, my buddy here, he'll be the guarantor. And then turns out that they in fact do get divorced. Then the husband should make a vow that he will not get any benefit from her. Why? So that they can't get remarried. We are worried that maybe this husband and wife are getting divorced just as a trick to say he doesn't have property, they're going to get divorced, and she will go to the guarantor, she'll get some property from the guarantor, and then they'll split it between them. Maybe they'll even get remarried. And so we don't want that to happen. So therefore we say, listen, make a vow that you can't get any benefit from her, and that way they won't be able to get remarried. You can't be married to someone that you can't get benefit from, and that way it will prevent this kind of collusion and tricking the guarantor to make the guarantor on a ketuvah pay. Now the Gemara asks, what is the reason for the law in the Mishnah that the lender has to go to the borrower first, and only then, if he can't get money from the borrower, then only then he can go to the guarantor? Why can't he go to the guarantor directly? It's because the guarantor can tell the lender, you gave me a man that I have to be responsible for, right? You said at the time of the loan, listen, guarantor, you're responsible for this borrower. Okay, fine. I accepted that responsibility. And so you gave me a man to be responsible for. Here, I'm giving him to you. The guy's right here. He didn't die. He didn't run away. He's right here. Go to him and get money. You don't come to me unless you can't find him. That's the reason. Matkif la Rav Nachman. Hai dinab de parsaeh. Rav Nachman rejects this and he says this is a law of Persian law. This is not Jewish law that that you can't go to the guarantor first. That's Persian law. Persian law says that you have to go to the borrower first and then only then to the guarantor. So that's what he said. Rav Nachman says this is Persian law. Now we ask about Rav Nachman. Adraba batar arva azli. Actually, go look at Persian law and you'll see that Persian law says you can go to the guarantor directly. So the Rav Nachman's statement is not correct. He called this Persian law. Actually, Persian law is the opposite. Rather, Rav Nachman was not saying literally that this is the Persian law. He was just giving an exclamation that a court that would do this law is a type of ruling that only a Persian court would give, because they don't give explanations for their statements. A Persian law is kind of random and they don't explain why they do things. And so Rav Nachman is not saying literally that this law is a Persian law. He's saying you're acting like a Persian court by just making something on the spot in a haphazard way. And so, in other words, he doesn't think that this reason makes sense. And so that just because the person is here, that you can't go to the guarantor. What's the point of a guarantor if he's not going to pay when he's asked? Rather, Rav Nachman says, what does it mean when the Mishnah says that he cannot go and collect from the guarantor? It doesn't mean he can never go to the guarantor at all, and the guarantor could just say, oh, go to him. No, that doesn't make sense. That's the point of a guarantor. Rather, what the Mishnah means is you can't go to the guarantor first. You have to, as the lender, has to go and try his best to get money from the borrower, and only after he's exhausted all possibilities of the borrower, only then he can go to the guarantor. So that's the reason, and that makes sense. Not that what it says here, that he can't go to the guarantor at all. That's at least how Rav Nachman understood what Abba and Rav Yosef said, because he could say, oh, he's here, he's not dead, so then go to him. Right here, you gave him to me, I'm giving him back to you. No, it just means first, but after that, he can go to the guarantor. Tanyan mehachi hamavet chabero al yedei arev lo yitba arev techila v'imamad amenat she'para mimi she'erseh yitba arev techila. And there's a braita that supports what Rav Nachman just said. If someone lends money to his friend and there's a guarantor, then the lender cannot go and collect from the guarantor first. However, if he did say, on condition that I will get paid from whoever I want to, then he can go to the guarantor first. Amar Avuna, minayin la'areb de'mishtabed dichtiv anuchi erebenu miyadi tibakshenu. What's a source for the law that there can be such a thing as a guarantor? What sense does that make? Right? This guy borrowed money, so the borrower should have to pay back. Why should someone else who didn't borrow the money have to pay on behalf of the borrower? So where do we see a precedent for this? And the answer is when Yehuda acts as a guarantor to his father for Binyamin. As he says, I will be the guarantor, and if Binyamin, something happens to him, then I will be held responsible, and it'll be my job to take care of it. So there you go. Yehuda is a guarantor. Matkif la Rav Chisda ha-kabelanuti diktiv tena oto al yadi v'ani ashi benu. Rav Chisda says that's not a good proof, because in fact that is a level of responsibility. It's more than a guarantor. A kablan is someone who has an unconditional guarantee, right? No matter what happens, I guarantee that I will provide, I will pay for the whatever it is, the debt, or make up whatever is the loss. And we see that that's a guarantee, that's an unconditional guarantee, not a guarantor, because within the same story, when the Reuven tells his father, right, that trust me, I'll take care of Binyamin, he says, deliver him into my hands, and I will bring him back to you, right? I will bring him back to you no matter what. So he doesn't use the word as a guarantee. And so the Gemara is assuming that whatever Reuben said applies also to Yehuda. And so Yehuda, even though he uses the words Erebenu, it didn't mean as a guarantor, but actually as a higher level of responsibility of a kablan. Ela Rabbi Yitzchak mehacha lekach bigdo ki arav zad ubad nochriya chablehu. Rather, the source is not from the Torah but from Mishle, that where it says if you lend money to someone, you should take that person's garment as surety, arav, right, for that stranger. So hold the pledge as a surety for an alien woman. So this pasuk is saying that if you are lending something out, you should take a guarantee. In this case, the guarantee will be a garment or some item, but to say it's the same idea. Just like a garment can be a guarantee, so too a friend can be a guarantee. And you can go and collect from the friend if the borrower doesn't pay. ואומר בני, אם ערבת לרעך תקעת לזר כפיך, נוקשת במראה פיך, נלכדת במראה פיך, עשה זאת אפוא בני. והנה הסל קיבלת בכף רעך, לך יתרפס ורהב רעך. אם ממון יש לו בידך, תן לו פיסת יד, ואם לאו הרבה עליו רעים. Pasuk in Mishle says, if you became a guarantee, aravta, for your friend, you put out your hand, you shook hands and you agreed, or you said it verbally, then you have ensnared yourself. You put yourself in a trap by agreeing to be a guarantor. And now you are responsible. So what's a recommendation? You should go and try to save yourself because now you're in your friend's hands. You're on the hook. And so you should go and humble yourself and grovel and beg the lender to get you out. He says, listen, I know I made myself a guarantor here, but can you let me out of it, right? Try to ask him nicely to let you out of it, because otherwise it's not in your hands. If the borrower is a lowlife and doesn't pay or mismanages his funds, you're going to be on the hook. So try to ask to get yourself out of it. That's what the pasuk says. Now the midrash on that says, "Im mamon yesh biyadcha, tel lo pisat yad." It says hitrapes. So hitrapes, we make a play on words. Pisat, it means a palm. So if you owe money, open the palm of your hand and pay out the money, right? Because that's the situation. If you are a guarantor, then you're going to have to pay money. And if not, if you don't owe money, but you owe an apology, then it would have, instead of saying would have in the sense of go and humble yourself, instead we switch the letters around as harbe. Go and get a lot of friends. In other words, if you need to apologize to someone, sometimes it won't work if you just go yourself and say, I'm sorry, the person is not in the mood to see you. Instead, send a messenger, send 3 messengers, send a few friends to go be intermediaries on your behalf to show the person honor. Look, these 3 important people come and say, listen, really, our friend didn't mean it, and can you accept his apology? We see that the Midrash is not taking it in the literal sense of the pasuk. It seems to be only be talking about monetary obligation. If you put yourself into a monetary obligation as a guarantor, then try to ask to be let out of it, because otherwise you're going to be in big trouble and you're going to have to pay. But the Midrash, focusing on the words here, you ensnared yourself with your words, says that this applies in addition to insulting someone. You say a bad thing about someone, lashon hara, or put them down, then you owe them an apology. And so make sure, if you owe them money, pay them money. If you owe them an apology, then go apologize. And if it's helpful, send messengers to go and help pacify the person who was offended. אמר הממר, ערב דמשתעבד מחלוקת רבי יהודה ורבי יוסי. לרבי יוסי דאמר אסמכתא קניה, ערב משתעבד. לרבי יהודה דאמר אסמכתא לה קניה, ערב לה משתעבד. So Amemar says that whether a guarantor is obligated to pay is dependent upon a machloket between the Tanaim, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei. Rabbi Yosei says in general that asmachta is valid. Asmachta is kind of like a bet. When you say, I'll give you $1 million if that person over there is Mr. So-and-so. Now, you don't really mean that you're going to give $1 million if so. It's just an expression, and you didn't actually have in mind to give it. Did you or did you not? Rabbi Yosef says, even if you say something like that, I'll give you $1 million if whatever, You said it, and therefore that statement is valid, and you're going to have to pay up. And the same thing here. When someone makes himself a guarantor, they don't think that they're really going to pay. Like, oh, listen, if he doesn't pay, then will you be a guarantor? So okay, I know this guy. He has 3 houses. He has plenty of assets. I'm sure. I know he's an honest guy. I'm sure he'll pay, and I won't have to pay. So, okay, as a technicality, you want me to be a guarantor? Fine, I'll be a guarantor, right? Yeah, as if I would ever have to pay the $1 million. So, a person doesn't necessarily fully agree to obligate himself as a guarantor. So that's why it's an asmachta. According to the Biyoseh, he says in general asmachta kanya, and therefore, even though that it was maybe a distant possibility in his mind that he'd ever have to pay, nevertheless he has to pay. According to the Biuda, however, he says asmachta lakanya. Since even though you said the words, yeah, I'll be a guarantor, but you didn't really have in mind that you would actually obligate yourself, and therefore you are not obligated. Amar le Rav Ashi lamemar hamasim b'chol yom dasmachta lakanya v'adeb mishtabed. Rav Ashi asks Amemar about this. We see every day that generally we follow the opinion that says asmachta is not effective. And yet, people are guarantors all the time, and they are obligated to pay. So there's a contradiction between what you're saying, because we follow halacha, generally asmachta la kanya, so how can we have guarantors? Rav Ashi explains that when a person is a guarantor, even though in general, asmachta la kanya, and if someone says, hey, if I don't pay and I lose all my money, then you'll pay? I'm like, yeah, sure, right? And so really asmachta would not be sufficient. However, in this case of becoming a guarantor, one does obligate oneself. Why? Because the fact that your friend said, hey, would you be a guarantor? So of all these people, he picks you to be the guarantor, means you're the most trustworthy. And you can go around and say, hey, did you know he picked to be a guarantor on that deal? I was the guarantor, right? Look how people look up to me and think that I am very trustworthy. So for that benefit, a person, the guarantor, will in fact have in mind to be willing to obligate himself. And that's why actually becoming a guarantor is not dependent on whether asmachta kanya or asmachta la kanya. Now, if the lender said, I will give you the $1,000 on condition that I can go and collect from whoever I wish, then he can go to the guarantor first. Rabbi Yochanan says that's only true if the borrower has no property. But if he has property, then you cannot go to the guarantor first, even if you made a condition that I can go to anyone I want. That's how Rabbi Yochanan explains the first opinion, the Tanakama. We ask, Rabbi hold on, Rabbi Yochanan, how could you say that's what the Tanakama says? Because that sounds a lot like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. He's the one that says in the rest of the Mishnah that if the borrower has property, then the lender cannot go to the guarantor, even if he made the condition. So that's Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion. It sounds like Tanakama would disagree and say, no matter what, if you made a stipulation that I can go to anyone I want, then the lender can go to the guarantor, even if the borrower has money. So how could how could you say the opposite? And the answer is chasurim echasirav hachi katani hamavet chabedo ayidei arev lo yipada min haarev v'imamar al menat shepada mimi she'aseh yipada min haarev. Okay, so we're missing some words in the Mishnah, and here's how to understand the Mishnah. If someone lends money to someone else and there is a guarantor, so the lender, when he comes to collect, cannot go to the guarantor. That's in the standard case. However, if the lender said, on condition that I can collect from wherever I want, then he can go to the guarantor. So far, that's the same as the Mishnah, Tanakama. When is that true? Only when the borrower has no property. But if he has property, then even if you said the condition, then you have to go to the borrower first and not to the guarantor. That is the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. And that also sounds like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. But we're putting it all into the Tanakama as Rabbi Yochanan said so. And now here's a new addition addition that the Mishnah, into the Mishnah, that we're also talking about a second category of a kablan, an unconditional guarantor, a different type of guarantee, where if someone says, I'll be a kablan, then even if the borrower does have property, the lender can go directly to the kablan. That's according to Tanakama. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Im yesh nechasim aloveh, echad zeh v'echad zeh lo yipara mehen. Here's where Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees. He says that if the borrower has funds, then both the regular guarantor and the kablan have to go to the borrower first. And so that's how he explains the Mishnah. In fact, Tanakama would agree that the borrower, even if you said the condition, the lender said, I'm only giving you $1,000 if I could collect from anybody that I want. Even if you said that condition, nevertheless, the lender has to go to the borrower first. However, according to Tanakama, that's only the law for a regular arev. However, for a kablan, the lender can go to whoever he wants, even if the borrower has funds. However, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, he says whatever you just said about the regular guarantor applies also to the kablan. He makes no distinction between a guarantor and a kablan, and in both cases, the lender has to go to the borrower first if the borrower has property. Amar Rabba bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol makom sheshana Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, b'mishnatenu halacha kimoto chutz me'arev v'sidon u'r'aya acharona. And finally, Rabbi Yochanan says, anytime it says in the Mishnah, the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, we follow the halacha in accordance with him, except for 3 times, except for the law of arev, which is our law precisely here, and also the case that happened in Sidon, which was in Masechet Gitin, and another case that we are going to see soon in the next Masechet, in Masechet Sanhedrin, about a case of evidence in a final disagreement. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.